Welcome back to First Thoughts, a series where I look at a game based on my first 2 to 3 hours of experience or by playing through the demo. Today, I'm looking at Moonstone Island, a title that was clearly inspired by both the Pokemon series and Harvest Moon. If you're a fan of either one of those, trust me, the combination is even more awesome than it sounds. And after talking about my experiences with the game, I go on to give either a recommendation to play it, wishlist it, or pass for now. Of course, because many of these games are just demos, things will change, and sometimes, if a game isn't worth recommending now, it could very well be an indie gem later. If you like this format, then do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, as I'm going to be coming out with a whole series of videos. Before I get started, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. More about who you can support at the end. And with that said, let's get into today's topic, Moonstone Island. The story begins on a small remote island, somewhere in a sea of floating islands in a clear blue sky. You're an alchemist, about to set off on a year-long journey away from your parents, who are currently introducing you to some basics about living on your own. The important things like how to plant your own crops, how to tame magical spirits to fight alongside you, and, remembering the important things like being sure to write home to your mom. Trust me, that's way more important when you don't have a telephone. With that, off you go to crash land on a strange island, introducing yourself as the town alchemist in quite possibly the most embarrassing way. Though luckily the barkeeper doesn't seem to be judging. After all, I'm not asking any questions about why she needs some stone to fix her basement, and she's not asking any questions about why I crash landed and got there in the middle of the night and she found me passed out. But before I get into breaking some rocks, it's time to start some basic farming, because this is after all a Harvest Moon game and I'm gonna need some crops to sell. After I do that, I entered a spooky cave which I happened to discover along the way. It was actually quite nice. I did later on get told that when breaking larger rocks you can encounter a cave, but I found it completely by accident just by smashing some rocks in my local vicinity. It's always great when you can discover gameplay mechanics through emerging gameplay without the game having to spell it out for you, even if the answer's there for someone who doesn't happen upon it on their own. From there, I spent a couple quiet days going around the town, managing my crops, making sure I kept everything watered. Since I've played these games before and not watering your crops is very bad. I know in the real world I tend to prefer sunny days because they're nice and happy, but when I'm playing a Harvest Moon game or anything similar, then I want it to rain all the time, as much as possible and very frequently, because that way I don't have to water my crops. And this is where I noticed the first atmospheric part of the game, because it has a really chill vibe overall. But this also isn't a trip to an island beach where you kick back, relax, and ignore your responsibilities. The time of day and stamina are subtle reminders that you're on the clock. Now for the demo, you're really on the clock. You only have 14 days to get everything you want done, which is why I played through it twice. Though, don't worry, I did most of the work for this video before actually playing through it the second time because that went way over my 3-hour limit. Though it should give you a little bit of a hint on how much fun I was having. On the one hand, there's a lot of reminders to be efficient with your time. On the other hand, they don't seem to be soul-crushing. It's not like if I miss 3 seconds here or there, I'm gonna immediately lose a life. But at the same time, I can't afford to sleep the day away by staying up past 2 a.m. I also liked that after doing a couple quests, I got my first form of crop automation, the sprinkler. They were pretty easy to craft and fairly efficient, watering 8 squares around them. So with my newfound freedom from farming, I dove straight into the dungeon, where I discovered that if you mess up, you lose stamina. And I like this. It means that my stamina bar is essentially my health bar for the day. I can choose to go enter combat, or I can choose to explore the islands, do some farming. There's plenty of things to do. Speaking of, if you are knocked out in combat, you lose the day. So there's definitely a strong incentive to only pick fights that you know you can win. And speaking of, the dungeon didn't have that many encounters. There were certainly enough to get my toes wet, and they went well, thanks in no small part to me having played way too much Slay the Spire. By the way, if you're interested in Slay the Spire, I'm going to link a review up in the card and down in the description that you can watch after this. And there were also some simple teleporter puzzles. After going through the dungeon, I got some nice loot, and I was back to farming. Though before I get into what I did next, I want to take a moment to talk about the combat system. Much like in Pokemon, you have a team, which in this case is 3 spirits. I don't know if this expands later on, or you're stuck with 3 forever. Each spirit has a series of moves that they add to your spirit deck. A hand of cards is drawn at the start of each round. Certain perks can influence this later. For example, something like Bash reduces enemy armor. Armor reduces the damage a spirit takes, and when it reaches 0, there's a break bar effect. The spirit's stunned, and you get to deal 1.5 times normal damage. This is great because not only is the enemy turn skipped, or if you're unlucky enough to have your armor broken, not only is your turn unfortunately skipped, but there's a massive damage bonus. This means whoever goes first has a major advantage, so prioritizing the speed stat over raw damage is definitely important. As spirits level up, they gain base stats, and you also get to add more cards to your deck. And so this is another efficiency puzzle. Do you want a lot of really powerful cards in your deck, or do you want relatively few, maybe remove some of the generic cards and upgrade as many as possible to have really high consistency? A large deck will have more tools to deal with different situations, and a small deck will have less tools, but is more consistent at applying the ones you have. If this follows Slay the Spire or most other card games, a general rule of thumb is less is more, though there are of course some exceptions to that. And after getting into a couple fights, I quickly found myself planning multiple moves in advance while fighting the boss, as if I was, well, slaying the Spire. So, thus far, combat was a nice mix of difficult to master, but simple to understand mechanics. It was at this point that I expanded my farm, learning I could also plant crops in the water, and learning that I could even fertilize my crops, which is a very effective way to make them grow faster and increase their output. If I'd known that sooner, well, I'd probably be a richer farmer. But I was doing a really bad job of the farming stuff and the making money stuff, because I was just enjoying being lost in the world. And so I decided to actually get lost in the world, by exploring some of the surrounding islands. Now, I still hadn't finished my broom, which meant that I had to go around by balloon, a nice slow meandering journey that led me to this cool temple island. And unfortunately, the temples weren't in the demo, so I got told that the princess I was looking for was in another castle. And then I continued to explore a couple other islands and got in way over my head fighting enemies much higher level than myself, which is where I got knocked out. Whoopsie. I guess time to be a little more careful. Grinding up on lower, closer to your level range mobs, or specializing in the ability to escape from undesirable fights definitely seems important here. And that's something that I found stressed throughout the game's design. Self-direction. I'm pretty sure that you can just spend most of your time on Dating Simulator, finding spirits for each of the villagers, getting to know them, giving them their favorite gifts, and much, much more. Or you can play Farming Simulator and build up a massive wealth of a farming empire as the town alchemist, maybe even brew a few potions after you end up mastering everything. Or you can go with a Spirit Explorer route, though I think most people will end up combining a little bit of all three. And that's something else that I noticed. The game used its quest system to encourage me to try new things. When I went to the observatory, I was told that I'd be paid for every spirit I encountered. I was encouraged to go out and fight new spirits, but nothing told me, okay, now you have to do that. Today is Finding Spirit Day. I did it because I wanted to. Nothing told me I had to explore the dungeon, except that it was there. Sure, a quest told me I could, but nothing was stopping me from just sitting in the hot spring all day and whiling the hours away. All too often, I find when a game uses extrinsic motivation, do X get Y, I start doing X only to get Y. But when a game works with intrinsic motivation, go to this island just because you can, or to see if you can, I do it, well, because I can. And I often find that when I'm intrinsically motivated, I'm far more satisfied with the end results. So I very much like that Moonstone Island focuses on intrinsic motivation, where everything you do feels rewarding in one way or another. I also appreciate that the timer keeps things on track without feeling too oppressive. And if you are the adventuring sort, you can even live on some of the outer islands, taming spirits as you go, maybe setting up a remote farm, automating it of course, coming back to harvest your crops later, and using fences to keep the wild spirits out. And of course, when you're tired of the adventuring life and want to take an arrow to the knee, you can always come back to town, settle down, and have yourself a nice date. And now while I could have asked anyone out on a date from the start, I'm sure it wouldn't have gone well, so I didn't try because I didn't want to ruin any relationships. I'm not sure why I valued these intangible relationships in a game that I'd only been playing for an hour, but I did, and so I decided, you know what, I'll wait on that until the full game comes out. Which brings me to the recommendation section. My favorite Harvest Moon was Rune Factory, because of a way you could fight and tame monsters. And I love the way this game takes inspiration from several other titles and combines them into something that feels new and unique. The exploration of an open world game, the temples from a Zelda game. Okay, maybe those two are related and they just took inspiration from Breath of the Wild. Pokemon-style monster collection, and, of course, deck builder battle tactics. Plus, the farming and inter-town relationships of Harvest Moon. So I give this game a glowing recommendation to wishlist. The game has a great mix of efficiency, chill vibes, exploration, resource optimization, and just getting lost in a world. Specifically, a world where you can just hop on your balloon, float off into the sky, and see what sort of random island you land on. Though, do be warned if you run out of stamina, it's probably going to result in a rather long fall. So far, I feel like Moonstone Island's greatest strength is the self-direction. The fact that the game isn't telling me I have to do this, but more letting me pick what I want to do at any given time, while giving me incentives to do different things. And its greatest weakness is that I couldn't explore any of the temples in the demo. Please, let me in! I just want to go in, Mystery Man! I don't know why you're stopping me! Even though it's probably super dangerous and I'd just get myself knocked out. In fact, I was having so much fun talking about the game and the gameplay experience that I completely forgot to talk about two systems. First up, there are skill trees. For example, when you cut down grass or harvest things, you have a chance to get money, because who doesn't find random money when they're cutting down grass? I mean, let's be honest, if I found that much money while cutting down grass in the real world, I'd probably be a professional landscaper. They say money doesn't grow on trees, but apparently it does grow in grass. And the other system is crafting, which I did very little of actually, mostly because I was still in the exploration phase. Though I'm sure in the future I'd be crafting more than just sprinklers. In fact, I'd be building bridges connecting entire islands, making elaborate bases, and automating my farm to be as efficient as possible with, hopefully, as little interaction from me aside of collecting all the stuff, just to sell it for a hefty profit, to expand my barn, to tame more spirit monsters, to, of course, do it all again tomorrow. And so those are my thoughts on Moonstone Island after having played through the demo. If you'll excuse me, I think I want to go play the demo for a third time, because there's something about this game that is really drawing me in. I'm curious though, have you ever played a Harvest Moon title? Or maybe Stardew Valley? Something that's a Harvest Moon-like? And if so, what draws you to that sort of gameplay? For me personally, I find something about the resource optimization, the combination of trivial tasks to a meaningful whole, to be very relaxing and fulfilling. Even if sometimes I find building the relationship with town folks to be a little tedious, because many of them are far too fickle. I mean, just because I forgot your birthday for 3 years in a row doesn't mean that you should hate me. Yes, I know we're married and I should have remembered, but come on, I'm a busy farmer and I killed 18 monsters this week. Give me a break. But I'm curious about your experiences, and be sure to leave those thoughts down in the comments below. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make more videos just like this possible. If you're looking for something else to watch, then I also gave my first impressions for Hammer Watch 2. You could always check out my thoughts on Slay the Spire, or go with a recommendation that's on screen right now. And as always, before I go, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.